The Battle of Telamon was fought between the Roman Republic and an alliance of Gauls in 225 BC. The Romans, led by the consuls Gaius Atilius Regulus and Lucius Aemilius Pappus, defeated the Gauls, thus extending their influence over northern Italy. Background: mobilization. Rome had been at peace with the tribes of Cisalpine Gaul for many years. Indeed, when a force of Transalpine Gauls had crossed the Alps into Italy in 230 BC, it had been the Boyar of Cisalpine Gaul who had repelled them. The Romans had sent an army but found it was not needed. However, when the Romans partitioned the formerly Gallic territory of Picenium in 234 BC, this created resentment among its neighbors, the Boyar and Incubers. In 225 BC, the Boyar and Incubers paid large sums of money to the Gaesator, mercenaries from Transalpine Gaul led by Anaroestes and Concolicanus, to fight with them against Rome. The Romans, alarmed by this Celtic mobilization, made a treaty giving the Carthaginian general Hasdrubal the Fair unimpeded control of Hispania so they could concentrate on the threat closer to home. The Romans called upon their allies in Italy to supply troops. The consul Lucius Aemilius Pappus had 4 legions of Roman citizens, 22,000 men in total, plus 32,000 allied troops, which he stationed the majority of his forces at Ariminum. He placed 54,000 Sabines and Etruscans on the Etruscan border under the command of a praetor, and sent 40,000 Umbrians, Sarcenates, Venetia and Cenomani to attack the home territory of the Boyar to distract them from the battle. The other consul, Gaius Atilius Regulus, had an army the same size as that of Pappus, but was stationed in Sardinia at the time, and there was a reserve of 21,500 citizens and 32,000 allies in Rome itself, and 2 reserve legions in Sicily and Tarentum. Gaulish victory at Faesulae. The Gauls overran Etruria and began to march to Rome. The Romans' troops stationed on the Etrurian border met them at Clusium, 3 days' march from Rome, where both sides made camp. That night the Gauls, leaving their cavalry and their campfires as a decoy, withdrew to the town of Faesulae and built defensive obstacles. In the morning the cavalry followed in full view of the Romans, who, thinking the enemy were retreating, pursued them. The Gauls, with the advantage of position, were victorious after a hard battle. 6,000 Romans died and the rest fell back to a defensible hill. That night Pappus arrived and made camp nearby. Anaroestes persuaded the Gauls to withdraw along the Etruscan coast with their booty, and renew the war later when unencumbered. Pappus pursued and harassed their rear but did not risk a pitched battle. The other consul, Regulus, had crossed from Sardinia, landed at Pisa, and was marching towards Rome. His scouts met the Gauls' advanced foragers head-on near Telamon, in an area called Campo Regia. The battle. Regulus put his troops in fighting order and advanced, attempting to occupy a hill above the road by which the Gauls must pass. The Gauls, unaware of Regulus' arrival, assumed that Pappus had sent some of his cavalry ahead, and sent some of their own cavalry and light infantry against him to contest the hill. But as soon as they knew what they were up against, they deployed their infantry facing both front and rear. They placed the Gaesator and Incubers at the rear against Pappus, and the Boyar and Taurasi at the front against Regulus, their wings protected by wagons and chariots. A small force guarded the booty on another hill nearby. Eventually, however, the Roman cavalry secured possession of the hill. The Romans advanced from both directions, throwing volleys of javelins, which devastated the vulnerable Gaesator at the rear, who were fighting naked with small shields. Some rushed wildly at the enemy and were slaughtered. Others withdrew into the body of the army, their retreat causing disorder among their allies. The Roman javelin throwers withdrew into the ranks, and the infantry advanced in maniples. The Incubers, Boyar and Taurasi held their ground tenaciously, but the Roman shields and thrusting short swords were more effective in close combat than the Gallic smaller shields and slashing long swords, and the Romans gained the upper hand. Finally, the Roman cavalry rode down the hill onto the Gauls' flank. Their infantry was slaughtered and their cavalry put to flight. Around 40,000 Gauls were killed and 10,000, including Concolicanus, taken prisoner. Anaertes escaped with a small group of followers, who committed suicide with him. Pappus conducted a punitive expedition against the Boyar, and later used the spoils taken in his triumph. The battle was recorded by some historians to be the last use of the war chariot in continental Europe. Popular culture. The battle appeared on an episode of the BBC 2003 game show Time Commanders, with the team of that week playing as the Gallic army. The battle is also featured as one of several historical scenarios in the video game Rome: Total War. Once again, the player takes command of the Gauls.